How to Create the Universe, The God Series Book 32, by Mike Hockney. This free audiobook series has been brought to you by the Foundation of Illuministic Guides. Contact the Foundation publicly as The Phoenix at tinyurl.com/foundation322. Check our foundation page at tinyurl.com/foundation323, and we have a posting group with many books and resources at tinyurl.com/foundation324. For the complete books that will be covered in this series, see tinyurl.com/Hockney322. Remember, there are many truths within lies and lies within fact. Truth is relative to the observer. The sign of a seeker is the quest for the truth. In that sign you shall conquer. Find the path in your own quest for the Gnostic grail of illumination. Choose wisely. We will be watching you. In a Hock Novinces. Chapter 2. The Flowing Point. How do mathematical points move in order to satisfy the principle of sufficient reason? The following considerations must all be taken into account. 1. No valid state must be privileged over any other valid state. All valid states are necessarily equal. None has a special status. 2. Each valid state must flow into each other valid state smoothly, uniformly and at the same speed. There can be no sufficient reason for abrupt movements, random speeds, jagged progress, and so on. Note that in science, the precise opposite of the principle of sufficient reason is invoked. Science claims that every possible state, speed and path will happen, given enough time. There is no causation and determinism in such a system. Everything happens according to statistics and probabilities. Modern science has gone wholly over to probabilities. Causation has vanished. Causation is compatible only with uniformity, with one thing happening after another in precise order according to exact analytic laws. Statistics and probability don't come into it at all. Everything executes with mathematical perfection. Reality has a 100% success rate. It's impossible for reality to make an error. If errors were possible, the universe would be overwhelmed by mistakes instantly and would either be wiped out, or degenerate into chaos. The fact that we live in a staggeringly ordered, organized, pattern universe is sure evidence that we do not live in the uncertain, blurry, fuzzy, a causal, indeterminate, indeterministic, statistical, probabilistic universe posited by science. There is nothing in science to prevent endless mistakes from being enacted. In ontological mathematics, a mistake would be something that violated causal law, and such mistakes are impossible. In science, formal causal laws have been abolished, so there is nothing at all to prevent violations of causality. That is mistakes. There is no reason at all why one crazy thing after another shouldn't happen. Science, as ever, cheats. What it does is define lawful, mathematical, outcomes and assign a probability to each one, so that every outcome is at least part of a rational overall pattern, even if not happening in a necessarily logical sequence. Although science then makes the convenient claim that the logical sequence is the most probable sequence, thus becoming more or less identical to a causal law. Even though that's exactly what has been denied. Yet, because it has rejected causation, science has no right to refer to laws at all, or to assign probabilities only to lawful things. But how would it go about defining unlawful things? How can you even refer to senseless, unlawful things? So, we always come back to math. But science denies that mathematics is reality. Science uses mathematics even as it repudiates mathematical causation and law. How irrational is that? It's forever borrowing mathematical rationalism even as it rejects it in favor of scientific empiricism. 3. Nature makes no leaps. No discontinuous actions take place. There are no logical gaps. Reality is a logical plenum. 4. Nature always operates with maximum economy. It always follows the shortest path. 5. Reality is absolute, not relative. Only absolutism is compatible with the reality principle, which declares that there is a single objective reality for all. 6. Reality is deterministic, not indeterministic. It's impossible for any event not to be determined by a sufficient reason. 7. Reality is certain, not uncertain, precise, not imprecise. Uncertainty and imprecision are incompatible with objective reality. In fact, uncertainty and imprecision are incompatible with any reality. How can reality be grounded in a blur, a haze, a fuzz? To say that the foundational elements of reality are indeterminate, Uncertain and imprecise is to say that reality has no rational, logical basis, and no possible answer. No one can ever explain why reality should be uncertain. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle is actually nothing to do with ontological uncertainty. It's actually about ontological certainty, but involving two linked domains, an immaterial, monadic frequency domain, outside space and time, and a material domain inside space and time. The uncertainty associated with Heisenberg's principle arises from the emphatic denial by scientific empiricism and materialism of the existence of zero, infinity monadic singularities. As soon as these are taken into account, the uncertainty vanishes. In other words, the supposed uncertainty actually applies to the false ontology supported by science. Change the ontology, and you banish the uncertainty. Science, since it has no foundational rational and logical principles, dismisses all such arguments and looks only for empirical evidence, which automatically means it looks only to the material world, and discounts the immaterial world. You cannot go around ignoring a world that you ideologically dislike. Your dislike doesn't alter the fact that it exists. Science has never once advanced a rational argument to show that mind, soul or immaterialism is false. What it does is ideologically reject them on the basis that they are incompatible with materialism. That's like Catholicism rejecting everything incompatible with Catholicism. When you have no reason for disregarding things, but only your subjective beliefs, opinions and ideology, then you are members of a mythos religion. Science is unquestionably a mythos religion, telling itself a little sensory tale that it finds comforting. 8. Reality must permanently respect the conservation of energy. You cannot borrow energy from nowhere, then pay it back to nowhere, as science ludicrously claims. The fundamental things have always existed and can't not exist. Their existence is their essence. In the case of a finite substance, its essence does not imply or necessitate its existence. In the case of an infinite substance, a zero, infinity monad, its essence necessitates its existence. It can't not exist. This argument was originally applied to God, in the so-called ontological argument, but used the curious contention that it is better if a perfect being exists than if it doesn't exist, or if it exists only in our imagination, or, to put it another way, existence was regarded as a perfection that a perfect being must possess. If he had all perfections bar existence, he was less perfect than a being that had all perfections and existence. Only the latter could be God, the perfect being. As ever, perfection can only be defined mathematically. The ontological argument can certainly be applied to mathematical monads, but not to a non-mathematical superbeing. The real essence of the ontological argument is that if there is no reason why perfection should not exist, then perfection, if it is possible, must exist. If perfection is not forbidden, then it is compulsory. If perfection can exist, then it does exist. The trouble then becomes one of defining perfection. Religious types conceived of it in terms of morality, power, knowingness, being everywhere and seeing everything. That is, they anthropomorphized it and projected themselves, writ infinitely large, onto it. But you can't bring human considerations to perfection. It's strictly about reason and logic, that is mathematics. Perfection, mathematically, refers to something with perfect form, a perfect formula, an entity that is eternal, necessary, incapable of being destroyed, degraded or of running down, incapable of error, absolutely precise, associated with no uncertainty, autonomous, consistent, complete. It must always be exactly equal to nothing, because nothing is the only thing that can never be prevented from existing. Nothing must exist. If it exists as static mathematical points, then we can refer to that as non-existence, but we could just as easily refer to it as existence shorn of all properties, something like Aristotelian prime matter, which was conceived as total potentiality, non-being, which required to be actualized by form to become something, being. What actualizes the prime matter of static mathematical points with no properties is motion, dictated by the principle of sufficient reason. This motion is none other than rational form, the actualizing principle. Motion makes things real. Motion is energy. Everything that exists is energy, and energy is math. Nothing can stop monads from existing. To be clear about their perfection, they are perfect in terms of their objective mathematical form. They are not, however, perfect in terms of their subjective empirical content. The form is eternally perfect. The content, how a monad experiences itself, is that which undergoes the dialectical journey from total potential to total actualization, from imperfection to perfection, from nothing to God. 9. Reality must be a monism. It cannot be a dualism or pluralism. It can however be a dual aspect monism. That is, it can have form and content. It can be both rational and empirical. 10. Reality must reflect the Cartesian principle that effects cannot have more reality than their causes. There is no sufficient reason why they ever could. Uncaused causes, on the other hand, can have more reality than all of their effects. As uncaused causes, they are eternal and necessary. Their effects, however, are temporal and contingent. The uncaused causes belong to the intelligible, rational world of mathematics. The caused effects belong to the sensible, empirical world of science. Underlying reality must always be the same. Manifest reality will change depending on how the uncaused causes interact with each other. The keys of a piano never change, but endless different compositions can be played on the piano, depending on which combinations of keys we choose. We are not compelled to choose any particular tune. No tune has logical necessity, but the piano does. The keys are the uncaused causes. The tunes are the contingent, temporal worlds to which they give rise. Every tune has an exact cause. There is no uncertainty. It's a little appreciated fact that the wave function of quantum mechanics is entirely deterministic. Left to itself, it will develop entirely deterministically. The incredibly odd feature of the standard Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics is that it requires an indeterministic collapse of the wave function, prompted by an observation by an observer. Neither an observer or an observation is defined, and no causal mechanism is involved in choosing an outcome. The outcome is selected according to probability, although, of course, entirely improbable outcomes are not forbidden. Hence any valid outcome, no matter how unlikely, could be actualized. The observer and the observation are entirely extraneous to the theory of quantum mechanics, thus proving that quantum mechanics is an incomplete theory. A proper theory of existence should not have to appeal to something outside itself, which is not defined by itself. Before there were any observers or observations, how did the wave function collapse itself? There is no mechanism for doing so. Yet if the wave function cannot collapse, it cannot produce the observers who are required to perform the observations that are required to collapse the wave function. This interpretation of quantum mechanics is trapped in circularity. It's plainly absurd, yet this remains the most popular interpretation of quantum mechanics. That's because science has no interest at all in reason and logic. It just wants to invent little heuristics that seem to work most of the time, provided you don't subject them to too much intellectual scrutiny. The wave function is based on complex numbers, while observable reality is based on real numbers. The wave function is unreal and abstract, the world of observations real and concrete. So, we have multiple violations of the Cartesian principle. We have complex numbers versus real numbers, reality versus unreality, potentiality versus actuality, abstractness versus concreteness, non-observers versus observers, mathematics versus science, deterministic wave functions versus indeterministic wave function collapse, and so on. None of it makes the slightest bit of sense, yet this nonsense is uncritically accepted by the science community and taught throughout the world. People even get awarded Nobel Prizes for coming up with this irrational drivel.